Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into this game recap episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns. I'm joined, as always, by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado, who I know is riding high after Oregon State's big 35-32 win down in California's Central Valley at Fresno State on Saturday. I am still under the weather. I'm sure you can hear it coming through your speakers. This might not be the prettiest podcast, but work is always a little bit more fun on a Sunday after Oregon State gets a win, and particularly when they win in the fashion that they did last night with Jack Colletto pounding in a game-winning touchdown on the final play of the game. Angie, what did it look like? What did it sound like from the Machado household last night?
Yeah, it was intense. I mean, the family was watching it. And it was kind of funny because they bring the kicking the field goal unit out, and then Tedford calls that timeout, and we were kind of debating: do you just go for it? You're on the 2, you have the jackhammer. Do you just go for it? So we were kind of back and forth, but there was a lot of stress and tension. And then I'm not gonna lie, I did let out a little yell when they finally got in the end zone.
That's the beauty of writing for a fan site is, in the press box and at interviews and press conferences, it's totally professional. We're unbiased, but when we're just in our living rooms watching a game, or when we're here talking about the game on an instant reaction type show or whatnot, we can let loose a little bit. We can celebrate the fact that Oregon State won on one of the more exciting plays I think we've seen in college football this year. A game-winning touchdown on the final play where, as you mentioned, Oregon State had the field goal unit on the team. It looked like the Beavers were going to settle to send this thing to overtime. And then Jonathan Smith has a little bit of a change of heart. I think went with his gut in the end and sent the offense back on the field and ultimately won that game behind the legs of Jack Colletto. So Oregon State improves to 2-0 on the young 2022 season with the win. Snaps an 0-for-6 drought in Fresno, snaps a 5-game losing streak away from Reser Stadium. A big win by all measurements, I think, for this program.
Absolutely. And I do want to give a quick shout out to the fans at Fresno. I was not there, and you guys heard me a couple times talking about not wanting to go, since I did go in 2001, and talking about what a horrible experience it was. I heard from a couple parents today that were down at the game who actually had nothing but good things to say. So I'm happy that they've made it a little more family-friendly atmosphere. And so good for you. My hats are off to Fresno for being hospitable and making it a fun experience for those that were in attendance.
That's kind of what we heard on Thursday from Jackson Moore, who joined us, of course, the publisher from barkboard.com, the 24/7 sports affiliate for Fresno State, joined us on Thursday's preview episode of the Damn Podcast and said, things have kind of tightened up a little bit at Valley Children's Stadium. The atmosphere has gotten a little bit more pleasant for opposing fans. We did see some Beaver Blitz members even in the crowd. We had a Jermaine Gray sighting, of course, Joshua Gray's dad. Good to see him cheering on his son, who had a big game as part of that offensive line, leading a rushing attack that, as we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, I think established itself a little bit more than in week 1 against Boise State. But let's kind of just jump in and look at this game at a glance with some stats. What areas stood out as far as, Oregon State was able to get this going. Fresno State took this away. So Oregon State comes out with a 3-point win. It's 35-32. The Beavers notched their victory by a field goals margin. But yardage-wise, I think Fresno State kind of dominated this game. The Fresno State offense, for the most part, got what it wanted until it got down to the red zone, and you saw that reflected in the yardage totals, where Fresno State tallies 492 to Oregon State's 397.
Yeah, and I think Oregon State's numbers obviously would be higher if there weren't so many drops in that first half. There were several drop passes that I thought that Chance Nolan looked really solid. I mean, dropping the ball, and I just that got cleaned up. I mean, if you were in the lodge and followed that game thread, it was up, down, up, ready to bench guys. And then, oh my gosh, it was exciting. So, Oregon State's numbers would be a little higher if a couple of those drops weren't dropped. The rushing attack, though, Oregon State did manage 178 yards to Fresno State's 132, which surprised me a little bit because Fresno did rack off a couple really big runs, and it seemed like Oregon State's running game was really kind of stilted. It came in small little chunks. I felt like at one point, maybe in the third quarter, they were starting to maybe kind of find a groove, but it never felt like Oregon State's run game got fully established.
No, and I think Fresno State's running game never really got established either, but it felt like it did because of that really that early long touchdown by Jordan Mims going for 42 yards. It felt like Fresno State had some success there, but we know the Bulldogs are a pass-first team, and that showed up in the stats as well as Jake Haener led a passing attack that went for 360 yards. Oregon State got 219, which I think as we're going to, we'll get into some of the offense-defense breakdowns here in a little bit as we go throughout the show, but I think what Chance Nolan was able to do in the second half and what the receivers did to bounce back from the drops, the inconsistencies, Oregon State made up a lot of ground in the passing game in the second half. And you saw that come to fruition on the final drive where Oregon State goes, I think, about 75 yards in the span of a
40
minute
seconds,
or so.
Yeah, 45 seconds.
Yeah, some big plays on the final two drives, and that's where Oregon State picked up most of its 219 yards through the air. So
let me ask you, Carter, I'm curious because the thing I saw on social media and in the lodge, there were a lot of people really down on Oregon State's defense. I felt like they must be watching a different game than me. Did Oregon? So they gave up 6 explosive plays of over 20 yards in the entire game, 2 of which came on that last Fresno State drive. But I thought defense played really, really solid. I'm curious about what your take. I mean, do they have some things to clean up? Yes, but that last possession they were blitzing too, that bringing the entire house. But I felt like so many fans felt completely different than I did watching this defense, and I see a completely revamped. I feel like this team last year at the beginning of the season probably would have lost this game by 3 touchdowns.
You look at the numbers, and Fresno State moved the ball, about 500 yards. I think that's concerning. I think the fact that the secondary and the pass rush weren't working in tandem enough to limit Fresno State to fewer than 360 yards through the air is concerning as well. But to your point, the fact that Oregon State bent but didn't break and forced Fresno State into 6 field goal attempts, 4 of those were converted. I think it came up big when it needed to. And in the past, before Trent Bray was appointed to defensive coordinator, when this was still a Tim Tebow system, that bend but don't break mentality was kind of what fueled the defense. And so we saw a lot of that. And I think that is where a lot of the fans' concern is coming from. I think it's reminiscent of a lot of the defensive breakdowns that we had seen before Trent Bray was appointed. So I get where that concern is coming from, but I think that there is something to be said for Oregon State really locking things down and coming up with huge stops time and time again when it needed it most. And, you're going on the road to a hostile environment against an offense that's going to move the ball on everybody it plays this year. And so I think just to do whatever you can to limit points scored, that's a win.
Yeah, Jake Haener's a great quarterback. I see Kookie Bot Dynasty. Defense was great. We made a team with an elite quarterback have to take 5 field goal attempts. And I think that's something that, like I said, the coaching staff is going to look at this and see all kinds of areas to improve. But I just didn't see all the kind of the disdain toward the defense on social media.
Yeah, Connor Johnson in the YouTube chat also makes a point saying that Haener just didn't make mistakes. And that's a segue into our the next stat category that we highlight here on a weekly basis is the turnover category. Yeah. So this game, as far as turnovers go, was as clean as it can be. Neither team turned the ball over. Oregon State did have 1 fumble, but Deshaun Fenwick recovered it. So no turnovers, no interceptions on either side. No fumbles were recovered by the opposing team. And I think for Oregon State, that was obviously a point of emphasis offensively after week 1 was to limit them. But defensively, I do think it is a little disappointed a little disappointing to see the Beavers come up short of taking the ball away.
I agree. Because I think Oregon State got excited there. The fans did, that this team was going to be maybe a turnover. But like others in the chat have said, Jake Haener is an NFL quarterback, and they really dinked and dunked their way for the most part down the field. Jalen Moreno Cropper, another future NFL talent. That was a really solid offense Oregon State played. So yeah, it would have been fun to see a turnover or two, but Fresno State was actually playing to avoid that situation.
The last category that we'll highlight here before we move on to the game flow segment of this episode is pocket pressure and the push from the front seven. So tackles for loss and sacks and quarterback hurries are, I think, the best ways to measure those. And so when you look at what the two teams did there, again, another category where it was pretty even. So Oregon State racked up 5 tackles for loss, only sacked Jake Haener once. Fresno State, meanwhile, sacked Chance Nolan twice on its 5 tackles for loss. So similar numbers from the front sevens, but I feel like when you were watching the game, it felt like Oregon State was getting pressure. It felt like it just wasn't getting home. So
it was. I mean, there were several times in that third and fourth quarter that Haener had to throw the ball away because the pocket was collapsing and no one was open.
Yeah, I mean, the quarterback hurries. No, go ahead.
Oh, but I know on Thursday I spoke about it. After watching them play Cal Poly, I really thought that the offensive line looked like it could be a very weak point for Fresno. And while they weren't as solid as Oregon State's offensive line, I didn't think they did a pretty solid job of giving him protection. But Haener is just so good at getting that ball out quickly and making a quick decision.
Yeah, the point I was going to make there was the quarterback hurries were there for Oregon State. Yeah. You know, they pressured Haener 5 times, but only to only sack him once, I think is a disappointment considering what you just said. We expected this matchup of Oregon State's revitalized front seven against Fresno State's pretty weak offensive line. I mean, by all accounts, that's the weakness of that team. We figured that was a matchup that Oregon State should dominate. But one of the keys was, if it does dominate, then Jake Haener's not going to have as much time to operate. Passing game's not going to be firing on all cylinders. But the fact that the Beavers didn't get home, I think, is a big reason why you saw Jake Haener rack up almost 400 yards through the air.
When you consider that, though, a big chunk of that was, I mean, probably 70 yards was on that last possession. So it was pretty even. Well, I guess Oregon State also racked up a chunk too, but no, I was really impressed with what we saw though from Haener. I mean, complete credit to him though. Great quarterback.
That's the game at a glance. We're going to go in depth here in this next segment, the game flow segment, where we look at the scoring plays, turnovers. Of course, there weren't any this week, but we go down the line in a sequence and point out the plays that stood out to us and what we thought went well, what we thought didn't work there. Later on in the show, we'll highlight the good and the bad from Oregon State's perspective. And then we have some injury updates, no news as far as, the ones that occurred throughout the game. That'll come tomorrow on Monday during Jonathan Smith's press conference, when we might get some clarity on the severity of those. And then to close out the show, we'll revisit some of the keys to the game that we provided on Thursday. Again, I want to shout out all of the viewers who are watching us live on YouTube right now. Thanks for joining us. You guys are absolutely blowing up the chat right now. And
you guys are awesome. This is so fun.
We're going to try to get to these comments as often as we can, but we do have a really full show this week. I also want to thank everybody who's listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeart, you name it. We are there. And if you know somebody is having a tough time finding recent episodes, help them find the new show page, please. I'm still hearing from listeners that they're having trouble finding it. This transition to the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network wasn't the smoothest on that end, but I know that more and more people are finding the new episodes, so that is good to hear. But let's jump into the game flow section of this episode, where we start with a 3-and-out for both teams. So similar to last week against Boise State, Oregon State's defense comes out on its first possession and forces the 3-and-out. But first, it was the offense that struggled to move the ball. And I think right there, you kind of got an indication that, all right, this is going to be back and forth. Nothing's going to come easy for both sides. And maybe it's going to be a little more low scoring than some people thought.
Yeah, and I thought early on, I really felt that Oregon State was mixing in the running backs a little, maybe too liberally, and that's going to be a question I think we should ask this week when we have availability, is kind of their thought process on subbing out, because it was really early on, it was every play a different running back. We saw some Jam Griffin, we saw Damian Martinez. The Beavs were without Trey Lowe, and I think they really missed him on third downs this week. Yes, Deshaun Fenwick kind of ended the night as the leading rusher and 19 carries, but it didn't feel, like I said, that the guys were able to get kind of into a rhythm until later in the second half. But it did. That first two series, it was like, okay, defense came to play, and it's going to be a little bit of an offensive struggle.
The first points scored by either team came from Jack Colletto, the jackhammer himself, on a 2-yard touchdown, which, as we know, became a theme. It bookended the scoring. So Jack Colletto scored on that 2-yard touchdown to get things rolling midway through the first quarter, and then, of course, scored the game-winning touchdown in a similar fashion. Fresno State answered pretty quickly with, again, the big play that Angie mentioned just a few moments ago, the 42-yard touchdown from Jordan Mims. I think it was a little reminiscent of some of the big plays Oregon State allowed last year, where you just see, a gap open up in the middle of that defensive line. There's not a linebacker or safety there to plug the gap. And then, you just see a quick running back break through that second level of the Oregon State defense. So it was concerning for me to see that, but I think Oregon State after that really locked things down in the running game.
They did. And if you're watching it on TV, they actually showed it was actually Katana Ladapo who had missed his assignment. And that's what led to that. But Katana ended up having a career night, 15 tackles.
15 tackles.
Huge night for him. But yes, that Jordan Mims, and that guy was quick. He made his way. But I think Beaver fans might have, if you were in the lodge, that was maybe one of the downward turns into about, oh no, here we go again.
I mean, Jordan Mims is an all Mountain West caliber player. I think he was preseason first team all Mountain West. That's a very good player. And, good players are going to make good plays. And we saw that from Fresno State's standouts. Jake Haener was firing on all cylinders. Jalen Moreno-Cropper was causing problems for the Oregon State defensive backfield. And Jordan Mims did have that touchdown. But to the point I just made, outside of that, and again, this has been the trend of the Oregon State defense as far as stopping the run goes through 2 weeks. Outside of one big play, there is nothing there. And for the Bulldogs, I think, shoot, I lost the number there, but there it is. Outside of that play, Fresno State had 120 rushing yards, which you will take.
Absolutely.
And of course, you have to stop the big play, and the play happened, and it's part of the stats. But again, when you look at the full body of work, I think the run defense again just shows that it has made steps forward, and that those big plays are going to be fewer and further between.
Yeah, I mean, and it's going to happen. I mean, both teams. It's a 90-minute game. Big plays are going to happen. Try to limit those as much as you can, and try to have as many big plays as you can. So. I know it's next on the list. Silas Bolden had his first touchdown as a Beav. Were you surprised that was his first one?
A little bit, just because I think we have a little bit of recency bias on our end, where you and I have seen him, become one of Oregon State's top playmakers in spring camp and fall camp. He was the MVP of the spring game with 2 touchdowns. I think you and I agreed he was maybe the most productive receiver in fall camp. So a little bit of recency bias on our end makes it feel like not as surprising, but yes, I do think it is a little shocking that, here we are, Silas Bolden's a redshirt sophomore at this point, and, it took this long to see him break a big play, but to his credit, he did. His number was called. He comes in on a reverse play. It wasn't a true fly sweep, so we can't call it a fly sweep, but it was a little reverse play. He comes around the back and loops off to the left side of the field. And I think we saw his high-end sprint speed on display there on that 36-yard rushing touchdown.
Absolutely. That was so fun to see. Little trickeration. Do you think Oregon State's still keeping the playbook pretty vanilla as they can keep it?
I haven't really thought about this. but I feel like no, just because what we saw last week from that on that trick play where, John Dunmore's throwing a cross field pass to Trey Lowe. This week, the reverse to Bolden. I mean, I feel like we've seen a lot of, not necessarily trickeration, but I think we've just seen a lot of what Oregon State's offense wants to try to establish. It feels right to see somebody with Bolden on the back of his jersey running for a touchdown, though, right? I mean,
yeah, it totally does.
I had flashes of Victor Bolden on that play.
Like I said, I was just super surprised because I checked in on social media during the game, and his mom had put on Instagram that was his first touchdown, and it kind of took me back for a minute. But you're right, the recency bias in that we kind of have named him the MVP of spring fall. 3 field goals by the Fresno State, 4 of 6 on the night. Were you surprised they missed a couple?
I mean, anytime you're attempting 6 field goals, I think you're going to have a miss here or there. It's, this is the college game after all. I've been watching the NFL all day. Here
Seriously?
We are at 5:30 p.m. on a Sunday, and I've seen about 10 missed field goals already in the NFL. So, no, I think Abraham Montano came in and did his job, converted on 66% of those, hit 4 of them, gave Fresno State the lead with, I believe it was his third one.
Yes.
So the Bulldogs
14 with 10 minutes left in the third quarter.
The Bulldogs had that 2-point lead early in the third quarter because of what he was doing for them. And, I talked about Oregon State's defense bending but not breaking and coming up with red zone stops. Well, on the flip side, if you're not scoring touchdowns, you better hope that you're converting with some sort of points there. When you get down into the red zone, and that's where a player like Montano comes in big with his 4 field goals, and I think put Fresno State in as good of a position to win as he could have possibly done.
Yeah. I mean, when you're stopping them from getting touchdowns, that's crazy. And then so Fresno State then early on in the third quarter has a 2-point lead. Then Jordan Mims scores an 11-yard rushing TD that makes it a 2-possession Bulldog lead. Beavers return or answer with 2 minutes later with a Fenwick 2-yard TD. So this is when things kind of started not getting crazy, but just starting to kind of settle in. Bulldogs had to settle for another field goal. So they are up 26-21 early in the fourth quarter. You think it's done yet? I mean, are you kind of starting to settle in like, ooh, they're up by 5 now? Or did you never lose hope?
Well, I think when Fenwick scored that touchdown, and Oregon State put together a drive when it needed to. It's down 2 possessions. It needs points of some sort, and it marches all the way down the field, and you cap it off with a touchdown. At that point, I said, okay, Oregon State's not going anywhere. When I felt like this game was in the most danger of going, lopsided one way or of things slowing down, I thought it was after Mims' 11-yard touchdown run to put Fresno State up by, I believe it was 9 at that point.
I mean, that third quarter, it felt like momentum had totally shifted.
Yeah. And I think, in an environment where you've got 40,000 people on your side and where Oregon State has never won and where the Beavers have struggled in the last year. Well, I mean, more than just the last year, but of course, Oregon State losing 5 straight away from Reeser. I think that's where it felt like it could get out of hand, but to Oregon State's credit, responded with a touchdown. So you left off at the Bulldogs settling for another field goal.
Yes.
They're up 5 early in the fourth quarter. And at that point, Fresno State had been to the red zone 5 times, but it only had 1 touchdown. And so I think that's where you're thinking, wow, okay, this Oregon State defense has done its job. This game is still within reach, and largely that is a product of the defense. Now we just need to see the offense come up with a big play. And sure enough, Trayshawn Harrison, who I think I don't want to bash him. Like, I understand it. A lot of this is mental, and drops happen. We saw it a lot with Luke Musgrave early in his career. I think part of it's mental, but he had a short-term memory, and he put it behind him. He came back out of the locker room and came up with one of the biggest plays of this game, a 17-yard screen pass where he shifted throughout the entire Fresno State defense, made a couple of guys miss with some juke moves, had a spin move in there, and then showed off his speed at the end to kind of set the edge and get around the corner and find the end zone. So Harrison, after struggling with drops in the first half, comes back and actually gives Oregon State the lead with under 2 minutes left. And I thought that was a big moment for Oregon State's offense, where things hadn't been going its way. And this particular player had been struggling. But all of that changed with one play where Oregon State takes the lead and he kind of rights the ship.
Yeah, and Nick Volker says, too, you have to give credit to Fenwick on that drive because he led that Harrison TD, that he was on a mission to move the ball. And I did it. Fenwick really started moving the chains a little bit there. And the Beavs stuck with him. They were kind of finding that rhythm. Fenwick was the guy. But yeah, I mean, Harrison, I don't know if it's, like you said, mental, if it's concentration, but, you know, he missed that surefire TD at Boise State early on. The couple drops, but it was a whole team effort. I mean, Micaiah Tung, his number was called. He had a big drop. Tyjon Lindsey had one in his hands that he dropped. That's something I think that they really need to shore up here. But to your credit, Carter, that's something we've talked about all fall camp, is that the consistency from the wide receivers is going to be maybe what wins or loses some games for this team.
In the past, our concern was the receiver's ability to get open. And get separation. And I think we've seen them take a step forward in that department this year. It's just, you know, now that they're getting open, they're having trouble holding the ball. And I think for the wide receiver position in particular, that's an area that you have to feel confident about their ability to shore up, because after all, their job is to catch the ball. There's a reason they're on a D1 roster. It's because they're good at catching the ball. So I think
otherwise you become a defensive back.
Yeah.
If you have brick hands, you become a DB.
So I think they've done the hard part in their improvement of you know, more consistently getting open and becoming more crisp in their routes. Now it's just about finishing the play.
Yes. So we are now in the fourth quarter. Beavs are up 29-26 with 1:50 left in the game. How are you feeling right now? I think you and I were texting about this point.
Yeah, I think my initial thought was, okay, this is way too much time for Jake Haener. You know, obviously, if you're playing against a team that their strength is to run the ball and, you know, to kind of to wear you down on, you know, in the trenches, you're thinking, okay, maybe 1:50 isn't enough time. We might be safe here. But for a team whose strength is to air it out and to make big plays through the air, you're thinking, great. 1:50, that's way too much time for an NFL quarterback who's got elite receivers, great speed on the edges. And sure enough, that Harrison touchdown was one of 3 lead changes in the final 2 minutes, because you're seeing 2 high-level offenses go at it. So Fresno State takes just 45 seconds to answer. A 45-yard pass, which I really want to discuss this one. Set up the 4-yard touchdown from Jake Haener to Eric Brooks, which put Fresno State back on top. But I think the key to that drive was the 45-yard pass that set them up in the red zone.
Yes.
And it was a play that had me scratching my head, because I was like, all right, Oregon State hasn't been getting home on Jake Haener all day. The blitz has been effective, but not to the point where it's resulted in any negative plays. So to send the house and to leave one safety back there when you know Fresno State's going to try to go over the top, I felt like it was a big risk to assume or to hope that you're going to sack Haener or force a throwaway there.
Yeah, I mean, that was, you knew they were going to blitz, but they brought everybody. Yeah, everybody came. So
I mean, I think Jaden Grant was about 40 yards downfield.
He was kind of like the home run safety
and everybody else rushed.
Everybody went. You know, I mean, they had their best luck, I guess, of the whole night with the Katana Ladapo safety blitz, delayed safety blitz. But yeah, they knew. That one had me scratching my head too, because you hadn't had any luck getting to Haener most of the night. I don't know what they thought they were going to do different. But okay, now just to play devil's advocate a little bit, because I was scratching my head there too. But what if Oregon State holds them, and then doesn't have time to come back down and score if they ended up scoring?
Yeah, I mean, it's very true. If Fresno State is going to score on that drive, you want them to do it early on in the 1:50 that they have left. But obviously the goal there defensively is to hold them out of the end zone.
I can't wait for Wednesday when we get to talk to the defensive coaches, because I'm just curious I don't know if we'll get Trent this week, but I'm curious as to what that thought process was to bring everybody. Poor Jaden Grant was like back there literally on an island. yeah, it was, like I said, I'm sure there was a reason behind it, but at the time it just didn't seem like the smart move.
Yeah, once Fresno State got down into the red zone, here you are thinking again, okay, well, Oregon State's been great here all game. Maybe they can hold them out. But that 4-yard touchdown to Eric Brooks put Fresno State back up by 3. But only 3 because the extra point was wide right. And that turned out to be a key play in this game because it gave Oregon State the opportunity, if it wanted to
kick a field
spoiler
goal.
alert, it didn't, to kick a field goal and potentially send the game to overtime, which sets us up for the final drive and the final play of the game. Oregon State has 1 minute and 5 seconds to go the length of the field. It does so. Chance Nolan looked, he was crisp. He was putting the ball exactly where it needed to be. And on this play, his receivers came up big. Josiah Irish deserves a shout out.
Yes.
His number was called in a big time position and he came up with a catch. Luke Musgrave on the sideline came up with a, I think, 24-yard catch to get into the red zone. 2 very big plays by the receiving corps and a bunch of great passes by Nolan on a drive where he needed to be crisp.
I thought Nolan looked good all night. I have been critical of Nolan over the past. I just didn't know if he was the right guy. I've been very, very impressed with him the first 2 weeks of the season. But yes, Josiah Irish, that was kind of a surprise that his number got called. Like you said, Luke Musgrave, seriously, that guy has elevated his game in the past year since about Oregon on into this year. So, yeah, Luke Musgrave is a grown man. But we're going to need, Oregon State needs him because they don't have a lot of the bigger targets. And then we're down. Do you kick the field goal? Oregon State sends their field goal unit out. What were you thinking then, Carter? Because it was my son Jack and Eric and I, and we're sitting there and we're, my son Jack, I think it was, said, go for the field goal. Take it. I was saying, no, you're on the road. You're on the 2-yard line. You go for the win here. Your defense is gassed. Go for the win and get home. What was going through your head?
I didn't have any doubt in my mind that Jonathan Smith was going to end up going for the win. I think the precedent that he has set over the last 4.5, going on this being his 5th year now, is that, excuse me, Oregon State's going to go for it on 4th and 10 every now and then. Oregon State's going to, throw an onside kick at you every now and then. It's going to go for it on 4th down at the goal line instead of taking the 3 points. And in a situation where, like you said, you're on the road, you're playing from behind. This isn't like do we go to overtime or do we, potentially get out of here with a win type situation? This is do or die. This is, if you do not score a touchdown here, you lose. And I feel like Jonathan Smith is the kind of coach to want to keep his foot on the gas and play for the win in those positions. Sure enough, he sent the offense on the field. Luke Musgrave came off with an injury, and that allowed him the opportunity to change his mind. But when Jeff Tedford iced the kicker, called that timeout, I just knew. I felt like, man, Jonathan in his gut there's something in there saying, go for it, go for it, go for it. And what do you know? That second opportunity, I think he went with his gut, and I mean, Jack Colletto, it paid off.
What's funny too is, like, even the announcers, like early in the game, they were like, when we were talking to Coach Tedford this week, he said, anytime number 12 comes in the game, you expect him to have the ball. I mean, it's not like when Coletto's in the game, you were wondering, well, maybe he'll have no, the ball's going to him. And he still, and I love that he went outside. He bounced outside, but he really, the offensive line, stellar that play. They opened up a hole he could have gone straight ahead to. Well, I just got totally buzzed by hummingbirds.
Angie's sitting out on her on her back porch if you're not watching us on YouTube right now.
Yeah, sorry.
But no, I think if you have a player like Jack Colletto on your team who is, he's the human 3-yard pickup. He's good for 2 to 4 yards anytime he touches the ball, and that's why he's so effective in those short yardage situations. If you've got somebody like that on your roster, I think you just trust him. Coletto's done nothing but produce in those situations throughout his entire career. So I don't think there's a reason to, I don't even think there was room for hesitation in sending him out there. I think that's the bread and butter Jack Colletto situation. We need 2 yards in a big way. Can we trust you to do it? And the answer about 99% of the time is yes.
So Carter, I want to bring something up here because this really stood out to me watching it on TV. because when we're watching in the press box, we don't see all this. But when they showed the sideline and Oregon State was down by the 3 points, and there was a minute 5 left in the game, I was blown away by just how calm and confident not only the coaches but the players all looked. It was striking how different that this team is compared to teams of the past that we've covered that might have been panicking a little bit or looking. There was no look of concern or worry. It was like, okay, let's go down and score a touchdown.
That's the Jonathan Smith mentality of, we're going to stay level-headed. We're not going to get too high. We're not going to get too low. And we have seen that culture be built in the Valley Football Center over the last 5 years.
Even post-game, Smith looked just like stoic, like no smile, just walking across the field, like done.
Just there doing business, doing what they showed up to do. Yeah. That is that's the final play of the game. Oregon State wins it 35-32 in Fresno. We're going to come back on the second half of the show, talk about what went well for the Beavers, what didn't go so well, update some of the injuries from the game, and revisit our keys from Thursday. But first, I want to remind everybody who's listening to us on YouTube and across your network of favorite podcast apps, you name it, you can find us. That BeaverBlitz.com is the place to be during Oregon State's football season. We have grown exponentially over the last couple of weeks as the season has taken off, and we want to thank all of you, the readers and the listeners, for joining us for the ride. We're here to provide you the content that you're hungry for throughout the season, interviews with players and coaches, matchup breakdowns, our predictions for every game week. And I mean, we had a blast bringing Jackson Moore on from BarkBoard.com last week. Those expert insights are top tier, and you're not going to find that anywhere else with the access that we have to the 24/7 Sports Network group of experts. What went well for Oregon State down in Fresno? I want to start with the defense here, and I've talked about this. You mentioned it, but the fact that the defense was just so lights out in the red zone, I think is the reason that Oregon State won this game. I think the fact that, while Fresno State had success the rest of the way down the field, that the Beavers held them to field goals 3 times of the 5 times that they scored. That's a difference in the game right there.
Totally different. And like I said, this team 2 years ago, probably would have given up or lost by 21. Just the way it would have worked out. Huge. It's a road game in a hostile environment. One of the best Beaver teams ever to play in 2001. Okay, maybe not ever, but coming off of the best season and still had a ton of that talent. Couldn't even come close. Huge improvement. And then that kind of comes into the next point, which is the run defense. 42-yard TD by Mims. That was like the biggest, run they gave up. 29 carries, 132 yards, 2 TDs. If I would tell you that Oregon State would give up 132 yards on 29 carries, you would think that's a totally acceptable outing for the defense.
Yeah, I think, the big plays have been there the last couple of weeks. Obviously, against Boise State, it was Talon Green taken off for, I want to say 74 yards for that touchdown. This week, it's a running back who finds a gap, through the line there. So there's stuff to clean up. The running game is not perfect. We didn't expect it to be perfect, but we certainly expected it to be better than it had been in recent years. And I think even within the context of these big plays occurring every now and then, we can both agree, and I think everybody who's watching can agree, that when the opposing team hands the ball off, we're not expecting this thing to go for 15 yards. And when it's 2nd and 10 and you need the defense to stay ahead of schedule and force a 3rd and long, they're doing that because the offense is only running for 2, 3, 4 yards a carry. Whereas in the past, I think we saw a lot of teams pick up 5, 6, 7 yards every time they were getting the ball.
Yeah. And I think I mentioned this in She Said, that'll come up on Monday, but you have to remember the season's long. It's 12 games, 12 rungs to the ladder. Oregon State's only on that 2nd rung. And I think it's easy as fans to, you win and it's like, well, we didn't win by enough, or we didn't, you kind of gnash on some of the bad that went wrong, but this is a long season. And honestly, when bad things happen, and if you can still come out with a win, that just gives the guys, the coaches, something to work toward and get better at. So when they see it again, it's not going to happen. It's a long season. So yeah, it wasn't always pretty, but you just hope that every game they get a little bit better.
That was one of my takeaways from week 1 was that Oregon State had all of these penalties offensively, which, mind you, they cleaned up very well in week 2. They had a couple of turnovers, I think 3 offensively. They had all of these areas that they wanted to improve upon, but they still won by 17. Going down to Fresno, the defense wasn't perfect. It gave up a couple of big plays. It didn't hold Jake Haener in check as much as it wanted to, but it still won. And we're seeing more often in these 2 games the big plays and the mistakes and all of these things that in the past would have changed the game.
Yes.
We're seeing them become almost non-factors because Oregon State is making up for it in other areas. And I think is one of I think that's one of the biggest signs of improvement from this program.
And the confidence it gives them then to know, I mean, winning on the road's hard. And I think it gets to be kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. Oh my gosh, we've lost 5 straight. Oh my gosh, we've never won in Fresno. So when you can kind of get over that hump and even overcome mistakes, it gives you confidence going into the next game.
Did I lose you? Oh, there you are.
Nope,
okay.
I'm here.
Another area that I wanted to highlight that I think went really well for Oregon State was the passing game in the second half. So we've talked about the drops that were issues. I think Oregon State was really trying to establish the run and at times shied away from the pass, which was opposite from last week in that first half. It couldn't sustain drives. The big play wasn't there at all, unlike against Boise State. And so you saw the passing game just kind of become a little bit of an afterthought where Chance Nolan goes 3 of 9 for 33 yards in the first half. I mean, I looked at the stat sheet halfway through and said, man, this is like the complete opposite of what we saw a week ago. So to see that completely flip in the second half, Nolan racked up almost 200 yards in the second half alone. He finished 14 of 27 on the night, which is only slightly above 50%. But I think if the passes that need to be caught, if the passes that need to be caught are being caught, he's closer to 70% on the night.
Yeah, you're 6 drops. That would put him at 20 of 27, and probably closer to 300 yards.
I think Nolan's night was a lot better than the numbers showed. Yeah. I know he underthrew a deep ball to Anthony Gould in the end zone that would have been a touchdown probably if it was placed on the money, but it was a deep throw that, again, in the past might be picked off or might sail 10 yards out of the end zone. We just haven't seen Chance Nolan miss to the extent that he missed last year. And so even on a night where he goes 14 of 27 and you say, man, Nolan didn't really look great, we're sitting here saying, no, I think Chance Nolan had a pretty good game. I think his numbers just don't tell the whole story.
Exactly. It kind of stinks when a receiver gets credited for drops too, when the ball was there and should have been a catch. Yeah. So that ball, though, I do have to say the coverage on that underthrown ball to Gould was played perfectly by Fresno State. Because even then I thought if the coverage was even slightly less, right. I mean that guy was on him. So I can't complain. I thought Nolan second half was money. I thought he was money's first half, but he had drops thrown in there. So 3 for 9 for 33 yards looks horrendous. But then when you finish 14, 27, 219, and then I have to give props too, because I was critical of Harrison. He's dropped now a couple against Boise State, a couple early against Fresno, but he bounced back in a big way. And then, also Luke Musgrave had some big catches.
The not so good from Saturday's game, again, the drop passes, particularly in the first half, it's a trend that needs to be cleaned up. I don't know how they're going to approach it. I'm fairly certain they are aware that this is like the biggest thing that's holding back the offense. So trust me, they're going to work on it. I just don't know what that looks like. But another area that we haven't touched on as much is that the defense didn't force any turnovers. And so, we were dialed in on, okay, well, can they pressure Jake Haener? Can they stay glued to receivers? But I don't think we really emphasized the importance of turning Fresno State over when we were previewing this game. But I think that would have been a great way to kind of separate a little bit. When Oregon State did have the lead, Fresno State was right there and it always clawed back. It felt like if the Beavers could force a turnover, and take a 2-possession lead or build a lead that was, in the double digits, that game would have had a little bit more of a secure feeling. But the fact that Oregon State, defensively didn't force any turnovers, I just felt like Jake Haener had too many opportunities to make plays.
Yeah, I agree. And, I think maybe we took it a little for granted after the 5 turnovers against Boise State that maybe this team was going to win those battles, and it wasn't. But credit then Fresno State, they were taking away the deep ball most of the time. It was just some dinks and dunks across the field. So, but still, it would have been nice to have 1 or 2. I kept thinking every once in a while I'd think, okay, now would be a perfect time for a turnover. Just didn't happen.
And Haener is one of the more accurate quarterbacks out there. I mean, I think he's an NFL caliber player. In week 1 against Cal Poly, he completed like 80 to 85% of his passes. So he's a guy who is not easy to turn over. But that brings us to this point where I think had Oregon State gotten more pressure on him, I think maybe you see some more errant throws or maybe you see a strip sack like we saw in week 1. But Oregon State just couldn't get home. And I don't really know. I don't know where the disconnect was because, like I said earlier, I felt like they were getting pressured. They just weren't finishing the play. They were a step too slow. And I don't know if that's a credit to Fresno State's offensive line for holding their blocks long enough. I don't know if it's a credit to Jake Haener for being just mobile enough or for releasing the ball quickly, or if it's a testament to Oregon State's rushers just not being quick enough. I don't know. Did you see anything there in the pass rush that was like, okay, this is why Fresno State's able to avoid the sack when Oregon State's blitzing and getting into the backfield with regularity?
Yeah, they did a really good job of securing the edge, first and foremost. I think they did a super job. I think what I saw from Haener is that he got rid of the ball very quickly. He didn't sit around. The plays were designed, the scheme was designed to be quick hitters. So think about Oregon State when they've had maybe less efficient offensive lines. What do we say? We need to do some bubble screens. You need to get the ball off into space to kind of mask those deficiencies with the O-line. And Fresno did a good job with that. I also didn't see Corey Stover. So I don't know if he was out. I thought about that later. Not that he would have made a difference, but, he is a big, force at the end. And I didn't check I meant to check the.
I would argue that Corey Stover would make a difference if he's out there. I think having another body on that pass rush and somebody who we've seen play at a pretty high level in practice.
I'm gonna pull that up, this participation report, because I thought of that early. I thought of it last night at like 1 a.m. And then
I have the defensive stats pulled up, and Stover is not in the stat sheet. So I'm curious to see if he shows up in the participation chart.
I'm going to look at the participation because I don't think I saw him. We did see Sione Lolohea, which we weren't expecting to see.
Which we'll get to in the injury tracker here in just a second. But to close the segment here on what didn't go well for Oregon State, well, Angie's pulling that up.
Yeah, I'm pulling.
I think I just want to mention that, that Oregon State's secondary, of course, was a huge strength in week 1. And go ahead. You have an answer for us.
Yeah, no participation from Corey Stover. So that'll be a definite question for tomorrow when we have Smith, because he did not play. So I don't know if he did not make the trip. We'll talk about that tomorrow on Monday when we meet with Coach Smith.
To kind of finish on my point here, Oregon State's secondary played so well against Boise State, had a couple of takeaways. Pretty much locked everything down as far as the deep ball goes. I felt like it was a little disappointing to see them not take away the crossing routes and the deep ball. I mean, I think Haener had the options that he wanted. To your point, a lot of his completions came on checkdowns, but again, Oregon State just wasn't there. A lot of the Oregon State, or a lot of these completions ended with tackles right after the catch. So the Beavers were on the receivers, but they just weren't, they weren't knocking the ball away or they weren't deterring Haener from throwing it. And I thought that was a little disappointing after the performance we saw from that group in week 1.
Yeah. And that's, like I said, that's going to be something they work on. I saw a comment here that their offense reminded, now maybe not as downfield, but a little bit air raid, a little bit Mike Leach-esque. So they'll have a chance to go up against an offense very similar when they play Washington State later in the year.
Yeah, Washington State, of course, still running, somewhat of an aerial attack offense under Coach Dickert up there. But that kind of rounds out the not so good for Oregon State. Since Angie kind of led us into this injury segment.
Sorry.
Let's just no, it's perfect timing. We'll jump right in here. So we're going to add Corey Stover to the list of individuals who did not play. Of course, we don't know if that's an injury. We're just assuming, but we'll get some clarity there tomorrow on Monday. But the players that we know did not play. So running back Trey Lowe didn't travel with the team, undisclosed injury. Isaiah Newell, also in the running back, did not. He was not available. I don't think we know if that was an injury or not.
Yeah, he's on my list to ask about on Monday.
But two running backs who were unavailable there. Alton Julian didn't come in yet. I'm still
he was suited up, though.
Yeah, I'm still thinking USC, conference opener is probably a good time to expect to see him come back. But one player who did return from injury is Sione Lolohea, who was out with an undisclosed injury. We didn't exactly know what was going on, but Smith said it would probably be a couple of weeks before that Boise State game. And so, you and I were not expecting to see him out there. I think we expected that to be, maybe another case of, all right, conference play comes around, we're going to get him back in there. But good to see Lolohea out there because he did get in the stat sheet when he came in the second half, got some pressure on Jake Haener. Yeah.
Luke Musgrave left ahead of that final play, pulled himself out. I couldn't tell if it was a leg or hip. I don't know if it's a hip pointer. It sounds like it could be maybe a couple weeks for him. We don't have official word on that, so this is just what we're hearing through our grapevine. But like I said, he seemed to walk with a limp. I don't know. I thought he pointed to his hip, but somebody else thought he pointed to his leg. We'll see about that. James Rawls left, but he did return. Kyrie Fisher. I thought Kyrie looked, I couldn't tell if it was a shoulder or wrist. I couldn't tell with him. But
it looked to me like upper body. He laid that big hit on Jordan Mims on that running play, and I mean it was one of those where the two guys are just running right at each other, and they just they stop right there because they're hitting each other so hard. And it looked like Kyrie kind of led with his shoulder, and that was what he was favoring as he walked off the field. So again, it's so hard to tell. When they're moving so quickly and what they're holding on to, what it is that they hurt. But it looked like, a shoulder or upper arm type of thing with Kyrie Fisher Morris. Another injury that popped up throughout the game was Atticus Sappington, Oregon State's kickoff specialist, seemed to come up with some sort of an injury on a tackle that he made, but he did come back in after the next touchdown and kicked off. So Sappington returned like Rawls did. So I don't know. I think the only injury that popped up in that game that might be concerning long-term might be Musgrave. But again, we won't have more clarity until we hear from Jonathan Smith tomorrow on Monday. You can follow that at BeaverBlitz.com. We'll have live video, some takeaways, depth chart, injury report, you name it. All the news from Jonathan Smith's press conference.
Monday is a busy day. Monday's a busy day, and I get to drive down. I get to make the pilgrimage, is how I should say it. The pilgrimage to Corvallis tomorrow. Yep.
Angie's commuting tomorrow. I'll be down there on Tuesday. She'll be back on Wednesday as we gather quotes, conduct these interviews, and then we'll be well on our way to another game week next Saturday. But to close this episode out, Angie, as we always do on these game recap episodes, we have to revisit the keys to the game that we provided in our preview episode. So if you'll remember offensively, back on Thursday when we had Jackson Moore on, the insight that he provided us and what we knew going into that told me that Oregon State needed to establish the running game. The Beavers needed to get two-dimensional again. They needed to to show that that's an element of the offense that, while it was a strength a year ago, can still be a strength in 2022. And I think they were really committed to doing so, particularly in the first half when the passing game wasn't clicking. To come up on the game with 178 yards, it's not incredibly inspiring, but I think 4 touchdowns is a good sign. I think 4.8 yards per carry is a good sign. How did you feel about how Oregon State was able to establish the running game? Because I didn't know whether to call this a win or a loss as far as if they accomplished our key.
I mean, so we just got done talking about Chance Nolan and his stats not maybe telling the whole story, and that he played better than his stats showed. And I would argue that these numbers look better than what I saw from the running game, just because I never felt like Oregon State was going to bust one. I mean, they never did, just like aside from Silas Bolden's reverse, which counts as a running play, I guess, but it wasn't really just a running back taking the ball. I think it's a negative. I don't think they made the goal. I don't think they hit that key. I think it's close. 178 yards, 4.8 yards a carry feels good. I mean, it feels okay, but it just did not feel like it ever got like really going.
The point that I kind of made to myself when I was like, all right, well, did they do this or did they not? You know, did they accomplish this key or not? Was that, well, the production was there at the end of the day. It just wasn't efficient enough for me to say the running game is back. You know, the offensive line looks dominant again. The running backs are hitting the hole and you know, getting into that second level with consistency. I just didn't feel like the efficiency was there for me to say with confidence that, you know, this running game is at the level we expect it to be.
And I don't think you and I expect it to be like it was maybe last year or under Jamar Jefferson. But that became almost one-dimensional that way. The offense was too dependent on the run. But I agree. I just can't call this. I don't think they hit this. I would not call this a win. Maybe a C-, a D+ on this because it did, like you said, efficient. I think that's the best word to describe it. It just never got going.
7 players ran the ball for Oregon State. The featured back this week, and it was truly a featured back situation. Yeah. Deshaun Fenwick came in as running back 1 and took 19 carries, eclipsed the 100-yard mark with 102, which tied the second best game of his career. He had the touchdown as well. So by all accounts, a pretty solid game for Deshaun to crack 100 yards on 19 carries and find the end zone.
He did have that fumble though, so that's his second time the ball's hit the turf in 2 games. So that's something to watch because I know he got it back this time. Oregon State running back, you cannot be putting it on the turf if you want to keep that RB1 spot.
An area for him to clean up for sure, especially when he has a player like Damian Martinez behind him who, you know, I think he only carried the ball 3 or 4 times. Jam Griffin saw his first action as a Beaver, took a couple of carries and I believe caught a pass as well for about 10 yards. So good to see him get involved. And I think we figured he would when we heard the news that Trey Lowe didn't make the trip and that Isaiah Newell wouldn't be active. I felt like Oregon State was still going to try to rotate guys through. They just didn't do it to the extent that we're used to or that we expected, you know, with that running back room at full strength. The defensive key to the game, and we only have a couple of minutes here, so our timing is good. We're staying on schedule. Our defensive key to the game was to take advantage of Fresno State's offensive line. And we felt like Oregon State's front 7 had a pretty good opportunity to get a ton of pressure on Jake Haener and to really slow down the running game for the Bulldogs because Fresno State's offensive line is the weakness of that team. Again, I was on the fence saying whether or not the Beavers came through on this one. I think it's another situation where the numbers look better than what actually happened because 5 quarterback hurries, 5 tackles for loss, and a sack. Those are all numbers that, you know, you'd love to see on a weekly basis. But while the production was there, it didn't impact the game enough for me to say that they really converted on this one.
Exactly. I think it was never, again, consistent. It was not, we didn't see a consistent, I think it got better as the game wore on. I think Oregon State started to kind of feel their dominance up front and kind of exert that. But like I said, Fresno State did such a good job masking their O-line and also Haener getting the ball out with the quick hits, the bubble screens. If you guys have been around, you've heard me lament this many times when Oregon State struggled at O-line, and they did a very good job. But no, I wouldn't say that they mastered this either. I would say that I wouldn't necessarily say they're failures for both our keys to the game, but I would say a C-, D+ kind of range. They did okay. It was serviceable, but when it's a key for a game, you want to see in that A to B range.
Yeah, exactly. And again, to the point we made earlier, the fact that Oregon State is still able to win a game against what we think is a very good team. This is a Fresno State team that won 10 games last year. That's a favorite to win the Mountain West this year. Always very tough at home. For Oregon State to beat that kind of team, even though it's not delivering on our keys, and even though it has these areas that it needs to clean up, it's a testament to the improvement that Jonathan Smith has made, not only as a coach, but culture wise and talent level wise and all of these different pillars that you build a program upon.
Another
the
quick
improvement
take
there is very clear in that regard.
And speaking real quick, I know we have to run, but you're talking about culture, and we've talked a lot about how broken this team was 5 years ago. There was a point where Damian Martinez ran. He got a few yards. I mean, pulled ahead. I mean, probably drugged the pile with him a couple yards. Came off the field, and he was greeted by Omar Spates and Kyrie Fisher, two defensive captains who were right there, patting him on the back, talking to him in his ear, really kind of, which is amazing to see when you want your team to be team-led, player-led from all facets. And Coach Smith mentioned that in his post-game last night about just how together this team is, whether it's special teams, offense, and defense. And that was so evident on the sideline last night.
It was a great example of how this team is and this program is becoming a lot more player-led, which is something that we heard so much throughout this offseason. But that's going to wrap things up for us here on this Sunday, this game recap episode of the Damn Podcast. Thanks to everyone for joining us live on YouTube. We actually crushed our record for live concurrent viewers. So shout out to everybody who followed along with us there today. Again, thanks to everyone who's listening on the audio side as well. But we love the engagement that we get in the YouTube chat, and we love being able to fire off our quick thoughts to some of the questions that come in. So if you haven't watched us live on YouTube, this is the kind of thing that you're going to get. You're going to be able to, talk with fellow Beaver fans and get some of our analysis on the fly.
And I want to just give a quick plug too. If you're not a member at BeaverBlitz, yes, the big annual promotion is not on right now, but you can sign up for a month for $1 right now. It is the place to be. I think our game thread, we went over 15,000 page views this morning on one game thread. That's another new record at BeaverBlitz. We're crushing records right now, and the lodge is so much fun right now with all the action.
The community is continuing to grow, and we can't thank you enough for the support along the way this season. It's going to be a fun one as it continues to roll along. We'll be back this week with all of our game week content as we preview Oregon State's upcoming matchup with Montana State in Portland. On the Damn Podcast side of things, we're going to be back on Thursday to preview that game. I don't know if we're going to have an expert on with us because it's always harder to find individuals who cover FCS programs, especially since 24/7 Sports doesn't really dive into that as much. But we will be back on Thursday for another episode of the Damn Podcast. Until then, you can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. Head to BeaverBlitz.com for game week coverage, and we'll talk to you on Thursday for another episode of the Damn Podcast.